VeloVoices. Many voices, one passion. Pro cycling for fans by fans.
Welcome to another edition of the VeloVoices podcast. This is Panache. Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne was canceled because of snow, but our recording of our podcast is not going to be canceled because of snow. I'm joined today by my sister from another mother, Kitty Fondue in London.
Hello.
And also, hello, Kathy. And I'm also joined by Tim Liu, our editor, wizard-in-chief of VeloVoices. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
Great. All right, let me just go down here and talk about what we're going to talk about tonight, and then we will jump right into it. There is so much that's gone on since our last podcast. So we'll talk about what's gone on. We're also going to touch on the Tour of Oman, which was a brilliant race. We're going to talk about Kathy's favorite part of the season with talking about Omloop and the start of the classics. Yeah, we're going to touch on Katusha and its inclusion into the World Tour. We're going to do a little section called Let's Talk About Schlecks. And then we will we'll go over the next several weeks of what's going on. And then, of course, we'll end with our sprint finish. And I hear we might even hear a little from our dear colleague Cherie and maybe even a little from Jens Vogt. So with that, Tim, I'm going to just hand it over to you. Why don't you fill us in on what some of the things that have happened in the last couple of weeks since we last talked?
Okie dokie. Well, the last 2 weeks have seen the European season really pick up speed even faster than a Lotto Belisol lead-out. So, as you said, we'll come back to the Tour of Oman and the weekend's Belgian doubleheader, the bit of it that actually happened anyway, in more detail later on. But we'll kick off with the Tour of the Algarve. Just 4 days this year, but a lovely little race with a little bit of everything. 2 sprint wins for Blanco to start with, thanks to Paul Martins and Theo Boss. Sergio Henao from Sky ensured that the Sky Rider won the Queen stage for the 3rd year running, despite having to double back after taking a wrong turn just before the finish, which I'm assuming gave him something close to a coronary. But crucially on that Queen stage, Tony Martin from OPQS stayed close enough to the leaders to then wipe the floor with the field in the concluding time trial. So he took the overall for the 2nd time in 3 years. Did either of you guys watch the race? Did anything in particular catch your eye?
Well, I was just wondering about Tony Martin. This guy seems to be able to do fantastically in these kind of 1 week stage races, but is he a guy who's going to be cut out for possibly winning a Grand Tour of 3 weeks at some point?
Oh, I don't think he'll win a Grand Tour by any means, and unless it's almost tailor-made for him with time trials like Wiggins last year. But I didn't actually see any of that race, to be honest, so I'm going to be quiet now.
So is Tony Martin like the German version of Levi Leipheimer? He's just really cut out for the 1 week stage races? Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the thing for me, I almost find the question a little bit annoying sometimes, and sometimes you hear people asking the same question of Cav. Can he ever be more than just a sprinter? And with Tony Martin, you've got the best time trialist in the world at the moment. You've got someone who is eminently capable of winning these week-long stage races. Why would he want to change anything? He's absolutely brilliant at what he does. Why would he want to even attempt to become the next Cadel Evans or Bradley Wiggins or Alberto Contador when it's not really in his nature?
Yeah, well, he is a brilliant time trialist, but he's also shown occasionally that he's a brilliant climber, like when he was 3rd on Ventoux in the Tour de France. So he can climb too. So it always makes me wonder, gosh, if he lost a couple of kilos, would he be right there with some of those elite Grand Tour guys? I don't know. Okay, anyway, what else has happened, Tim? Tell us a little bit more. We had Hutvar.
Hovar, that's right. That was won by FDJ's Arto Visho, who finished 3rd and 2nd, I believe, in the 2 stages. So on stage 1, we saw a welcome return to winner's circle for Thor Hushovd. It was his first win for 17 months. And then the 2nd stage was won by Lars Boom. So that was yet another good result for the team formerly known as Rabobank. And Cherie, she was at the race, wasn't she?
She was at the race, and she actually was able to talk to Jens Vogt at the race, and she had a little bit of a mishap with her recorder, but she did get to talk to him, and this is what she had to say. Take a listen.
Hi, it's Sherry from VeloVoices. This weekend, armed with my new toy, a digital recorder, I was a gal on a mission. I had a dry run with my mate Geoffroy Lequatre of Breton Séché, but the overpowering announcement system mitigated against me chatting to anyone else. Sunday, I set myself the goal of a few words with the legend that is Jens Vogt. I staked out the Radio Shack bus, standing next to my quarry's bike, recorder primed for action. He leapt from the bus at the very last moment, and I caught his attention by asking him, in German, if he would chat with me, albeit in English. He readily agreed, but said we'd have to be quick. Halfway through our chat, I glanced down to discover my recorder had switched itself off while I was waiting for Jens. Rookie reporter error and operator malfunction. I casually switched it back on to catch his response to my last question and his subsequent discussion with me and my husband about his bike and the race. So, the responses missing from the interview are as follows. His favourite race, the one that's just finished, his proudest moment, his first stage win in the Tour de France, stage 16 in 2001 while he was riding for Crédit Agricole. The race he'd most like to win, the Vattenfalls Classic. Funniest man in the peloton, Dave Z. Our chat starts partway through Jens telling me his favourite roommates were Chris Boardman and Bobby Julich.
Before,
Yeah.
I always did everything like last minute, like you just see now. I just coming out of the bus now. Then I was many years with Bobby Julich. He's also very organized.
Oh, he's
I
a
was
nice
just-
guy.
Yeah, and I was just reading my book or playing my Game Boy and just laughing at him, preparing everything. Then the next morning when I was in stress, he was just laughing at me and said, you're never gonna make it. You need to jump on that suitcase to close it. So I would say Bobby Julich, Chris Boardman, they were good for me.
Okay, thank you so much, and have a good race today.
Yes, thank you. I try to.
Do you like the trek? You've got to say you do.
I do like them,
Yeah?
but I think it is hard to have the same stability without that piece there.
You haven't got the one with the rubber in there, yeah?
No.
No?
That's for either old people or handicapped people.
Okay, like
I'm neither
me,
one of them.
Oh, that must be you then, sweetheart, because that's what he's got.
No, they want most of us to ride this model.
Because otherwise you lose rigidity off that.
No, just for commercial reasons.
Okay.
For public relations or where they prefer to promote this model.
Yeah.
But yeah, people they ride the Domane, very happy about it.
Yeah.
It's stiff this way, but has a little comfort that way.
Yeah.
They're really happy about it.
I love the shut-up legs.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
It
he's
doesn't-
always saying this.
It doesn't work all the time anymore. It used to work better.
I'm thinking of having slow and steady sherry on mine because Philippe Gilbert's got fast Philip on his. Yeah.
Poor Cherie. I really feel bad. She sees Jens coming off the bus. She's so excited because he makes time for her, and then she has a little bit of botch with her recorder. But some really funny stuff from Jens, and when you listen to Cherie's voice, she just sounds warm and charming, and you can tell why the riders ease up to her instantly. You guys have any thoughts on what we just heard?
I really like the fact that, Cherie, as I always say on Facebook, knows absolutely everyone. And she has absolutely no fear of going up and sort of saying, hi, do you want to do an interview?
Right.
So I think she's going to try to do more of those sort of quick fire questions to, the riders that she's riding with. Because Philippe Gilbert rides around where she lives. So I'm hoping that at one point this year she'll have his dulcet tones on as well.
Oh, I'd love to get back into his good graces. If she could put in a good word for me, that'd be great. All right, Tim, tell us about what's going on in Langkawi.
Langkawi, well, it's currently running. It's the 10-day Tour of Langkawi in Malaysia. So that started on Thursday and runs through to next weekend. We've already had 4 stages, so a couple of sprint wins for Teo Boss, one today for Francesco Kiki, and we had the first of the 2 big mountain stages. So that was won as a solo breakaway by China's Meiyin Wang. So at the moment he leads the overall classification by just under 3 minutes. And that will set up a big battle tomorrow on the Queen stage in Genting Highlands, which that should decide the GC. So we'll see a big battle there, and then after that we've got 5 days which should all end in bunch sprints.
Awesome. And we also had some action in Andalusia that I forgot to mention. I know Valverde was successful there. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so 4 days there. A couple of wins for Jonathan Yver, who's had a pretty good start to the season in the French races. And Valverde won a couple of stages as well and took the overall. So I think he's only raced 7 days so far this year, and he's already got 4 wins. So that's a man who's on an early season mission.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's doing Paris-Nice, but if he is, watch out. All right, so there's also in the world of cycling track worlds going on at the time, and I wouldn't know anything about it because I've tried to tune into the UCI channel, and of course it says that because I'm in the United States, I'm not allowed to watch track worlds. So, what's the point of the UCI channel if I can't watch track worlds? But Tim, I know you've been watching a little bit of the worlds. Tell me what's going on down on track worlds.
Yeah, I've caught a little bit of coverage on TV here in the UK, and some of the racing has looked absolutely fantastic. And it's a shame you haven't been able to watch because from a US perspective, we've had Sarah Hammer, who's certainly flown the flag for the States with gold in the Omnium and in the individual pursuit, which I think is the 5th time she's won that event. And from a British point of view, it's a bit of a shame because she became the first rider to deny Laura Trott a gold medal in any major championship event. Up until this week, she'd entered 9 European, World and Olympic events and won them all. So something a little bit unique there. But actually, from a British point of view, it's been a pretty successful week. We've had Jason Kenny in the men's keirin, won a fantastic race after initially it looked like he'd missed out on the final. Simon Yates won the men's point race. The women's team pursuiters did their thing again. But I think for me, the star of the championship, far and away, was another young British rider, Becky James, who's really stepped into Victoria Pendleton's shoes. She won the sprint. She picked up bronze medals in the 500-metre time trial and the team sprint, and then she finished off the championships today with gold in the keirin, where she put her foot down from an awfully long way out and just blitzed everyone. Fantastic racing and a real star for the future.
Well, I know the British love their track racing, and in the United States we are stoked about Sarah Hammer. It's always Hammer time in here in the United States. So. All right. Okay, Tim. So there's a little other news. There's something going on in China, I think, at some point.
Yeah, something going on. Perhaps it'd be more accurate to say not going on. So, just to quickly wrap up a couple of things. We've got we had the season-ending Tour of Hangzhou, which has been binned for the 2nd year in a row. I don't think anyone's particularly surprised by that or particularly sad. And I guess that means the Tour of Beijing has now been moved up by a week. So try to contain your excitement about that. I will. In slightly less positive news, I guess we've had the Fuentes and the Operation Puerto trial, which continues to rumble on as more and more witnesses are called to give evidence. Anyone want to say anything about that?
Just there's hidden blood bags everywhere, and it's chaos, and there's cats and dogs, and who knows what's going on with that thing. I can't follow it I try to follow it on Twitter. I get lost within the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, let's move on, shall we? So, speaking of Twitter, the Twitter sphere is almost spontaneously combusted yet again with the ongoing saga about he who shall not be named. We've had the US Department of Justice deciding to join the lawsuit against the aforementioned or the not aforementioned rider. We've had Floyd Landis' role in the whole affair coming under scrutiny, and it all really, for me, comes down to the question: Floyd saint or sinner? Kathy, I know you've got a bit of a view about that.
I do, actually. Right. Well, Floyd has this lawsuit against Lance on defrauding the U.S. Postal Service or whatever. And I just think that that's kind of a pot calling the kettle black. And, you know, I just find it really distasteful, the fact that people seem to be so overjoyed about anybody nailing Lance for anything, that they completely sort of disregard the fact that the person that is nailing him is not some sort of wronged hero or anything like that. You know, I mean, let's be very clear about this. Floyd might have done cycling a service by blowing the lid off the systematic doping of the Lanciers, but, you know, I mean, he didn't do it because he loves cycling. He did it because, it seems to me, he couldn't get back into cycling. I think if he had been, you know, like, say, Valverde or something, gone back into a team, been able to, you know, carry on cycling, he would never have talked. So, you know, let's be very clear as to his motives here, and I think that they were revenge. Whether good things came out of it or not is, you know, is another thing. But the thing that really, really upsets me and is the fact that he wasn't some young kid just taking a chance at getting popped in order to secure a contract extension or anything like this. But, you know, when he got his yellow jersey stripped, he went on this, because he didn't have any money, he went on what I think is just an absolutely shameful display of, he went on this road tour for the Floyd Defense Fund. And this was to raise money for him to fight the doping ban and the stripping of the yellow jersey. And the thing that really, really upsets me about this is that he went round and there were ordinary, you know, mugs going up to him and saying, oh, those terrible French, you know, we'll help you fight it. And, you know, these are people, waitresses and truck drivers and stuff like this, people who don't have a lot of money are giving him their hard-earned money to fight this, when in fact he looks them in the eye and says, thank you, you know, and I'm going to fight and I'm innocent and all this other stuff, knowing that he is a liar. And that just, as far as I'm concerned, that is one of the most despicable things I have ever heard of in sport. And so for people to sort of keep going on about like he's some hero, I mean, I just really find that really distasteful. And granted, he plea bargained on his fraud case, and he has to give restitution of about $500,000. But he collected over $2 million. So, you know, this court case, I mean, if he does get a settlement, he better make it all go to this restitution, because that's the only way he'll ever, you know, become anything in my eyes, to be honest.
Interesting.
That's end of rant.
Well, okay, so here in the United States, I think I have a slightly different take on this. You know, I think I agree with everything that you said, Kathy. What happened in the past, you know, with this Floyd Fairness Fund was awful. And, you know, there's no, you know, excuses that can be made for behavior like that. However, I think there comes a time in a person's life where they have what I'm going to call a come to Jesus. And I think at some point Floyd Landis hit rock bottom. And from then on, I think he's really tried to at least be as open and honest as he can about what he knew happened with himself and with his teammates. And one of the things that I found really interesting was a tweet, I think it was yesterday, the day before, from Danny Pate. And he said this in his tweet. And this is the standard that I kind of hold all dopers to, but especially Floyd Landis to. And maybe this is why I'm starting to have more respect for Floyd. It says, for a doper to become an ex-doper, he must help cycling more than he hurt it. And I think at this point, because of Floyd's openness and willingness to, because, you know, those years after he was honest were not easy for him. I mean, people kept trampling. And I think he's reached the tipping point where what he's done now has begun to help cycling more than he hurt it. Tim, what are your thoughts?
I guess I'm kind of in between where the two of you are. I think there's no question that Floyd has certainly polarised opinion over the last few years, but I think ultimately it's important to remember that for all those people who are patting him on the back, that this is still the same Floyd Landis who disappointed us in 2006, sickened us thereafter with his fundraising activities, and who has only comparatively recently joined the side of the White Hats. So, for me, he is forgiven to an extent, but certainly not yet forgotten.
All right. Well, you know what, you guys, we could talk about this one all night, but I think we should move on to some more positive stuff because we had some fantastic racing this week. And obviously, we turned from Qatar and we went to Oman. Tim, tell us about what happened at the Tour of Oman.
Yeah, it was a fantastic race, wasn't it? It ended up being a real taster of what we'll hopefully see on the roads of France in July. We had a stage win for Marcel Kittel of the Argonauts. We had a couple for Peter Sagan, one for Nasser Buhani, but really the race was about the ding-dong battle for the GC, which was spread over 2 days between Chris Froome, Alberto Contador, Joaquim Rodriguez, Vincenzo Nibali and Cadel Evans. Now the final 3 kilometres or so of stage 4 up to the summit of Green Mountain was absolutely brilliant, wasn't it? And everyone was on the rivet, everyone had a go at the front. Froome was dropping off and looking like he was going to be dropped not once, not twice, but 3 times. And yet each time he clawed his way back. And then J-Rod just blasted off into the distance just after the Flamme Rouge. And who sets off after him, leaving the others for dead and nearly reeling him in? Froome the Vroom, of course. I don't know what you guys thought of that stage, but it's I think we will do well to see a better finish to a stage all year.
Yeah, I thought that Green Mountain stage was the best racing that we've seen so far this year. I mean, it was seriously exciting, and I didn't get to watch it live, of course, because they weren't showing it. But I definitely watched the replay, and I watched it like 4 different times to see these guys, battling against each other. What'd you think, Kathy?
Well, I mean, I love any stage where Rodriguez just goes off like a shot. I just love him. I thought it was really an excellent race, and I really like it because it shows that if you get the parkour right and you get the timing right, kind of like with Strade Bianche, that race then becomes quite important, as opposed to, hey, let's throw a couple into China and have absolutely no planning. And you know what I mean? It's just I just love that race. Actually, I think it's a really nice one to start the season in, and it was very exciting, especially with all those big guys there, and they were ready to race as well. They weren't doing it to just come into form. They looked serious about it.
Okay, so Kathy, with that, I mean, is it too early to make any kind of cognitive predictions about what's going to happen in July? Because all the heavy hitters were there, except for Mr. Schleck, pretty much, right? What do we make of that?
I think that, anything can happen to anybody before July. Everybody was predicting Cancellara to win the double last year, Flanders and Paris-Roubaix, and look what happened there. Mm-hmm. So I kind of think, if they are all healthy and in form, I think the Tour is just going to be absolutely fantastic. Even if only a couple of them are, it'll be fantastic. But I mean, who knows? It's a long season.
Now, Tim, I think we forgot to mention it, but Peter Sagan won 2 stages before, abandoning with a sore throat. I thought that was kind of interesting that Sagan abandoned, and we're not teasing him, but we're going to tease Andy. Anyway, I mean, what about this quote, though, from Gilbert, where he talks about, I don't care if Sagan is better than me right now. If he is in the beginning of April, it's a problem, but he won't be. But that won't be the case.
I had to smile when I read that. I think Gilbert is right to an extent. Oman isn't the focus of his season. April very much is. But at the same time, just by the very fact that he's talking about Sagan, I think it's clear that he is at the very least concerned about him, and rightly so.
Yeah, I mean, the way he finished both of those stages, where he just rides away from everybody, I mean, it is out of Philippe Gilbert's playbook, right? Except the gaps they seem to me to be even bigger. So, I mean, I'm really excited to see how these guys show down in the Ardennes Classics. What about you, Kathy?
Oh, I mean, I just love Sagan. I just think he's he's so exciting, and he's just a really classy racer as well. I mean, he's just he's just going to have a monster year. Again, anything can happen, but if he's going the way he's going, it's just going to be absolutely fantastic. And I would put my money on him for the green jersey, to be honest.
Yeah.
Slightly controversial, Tim.
Yeah.
I'm saying nothing.
I wouldn't, it's going to be an interesting battle between Cavendish and him, and who else, we don't even know who else might show their face. So, okay, Kathy, my favorite time of year is in May when we have the Giro d'Italia. I love that race. I am, when they start putting the pink out, I go bonkers. But I know that your favorite time of year is the time of year that we are coming into right now with the Cobbled Classics. And on Saturday, you and I sat down on Twitter and we tweeted live Omloop, and it was glorious. So why don't you tell us about Omloop and how things turned out with that race?
Well, it was cold, that's for sure. But it was a strong field. Tom Boonen was back, although nobody really put any money on him because of he was still riding into form and everything. But what I really liked about the race was the Tannenberg. You didn't see the attacks that you did in previous years, but it still cut the peloton up in a way that really helped define the race. And then Chavanel, who looked like the milk tray man or a cat burglar or something, dressed all in black, which there weren't any numbers on his back, and I thought that was illegal. But anyway, he took a flyer off there and caught up with the breakaway, and so it was like there are all these combinations of the breakaways, and they're usually around 10 guys, and then somebody'd go off the front. And then when Vandenberg decided that he was just going to take the race into his own hands, and he went off, and it was only Paolini that could stick to his wheel, and and then you could sort of see the writing on the wall as they were getting over, once they went through the Flamme Rouge, because Paolini was always going to be able to out-sprint him, and it was just, he's twice the size of Paolini as well. But I thought it was a really great race
right.
because it had 3 people on the podium that nobody would have put any money on, and that's what I really like about the Cobbled Classics and things, is it's always really kind of unexpected in a lot of ways, and a race can just turn on a dime, and it's just I don't know, I just love races like that.
Yeah, I thought when Chavanel went off the front from the breakaway solo with like 40 kilometers to go, I thought, oh my goodness, he's going to try to pull a Boonen, a la Paris-Roubaix last year, and it wasn't meant to be. But boy, I love that stealth black. Oh, he looks so good. And I thought, when he got back in that group and he just sat wheels, I thought, oh my goodness, Vandenberg is setting this up for him just to sit wheels, and then he's going to go off and do it again. But he didn't. He didn't have it.
No.
And Vandenberg had it, and Paolini knew, because he's so experienced, he knew that was the right wheel to get on. And like you said, what impressed me is that none of the big favorites were on the podium. It was, I think the third place guy was somebody from one of the domestic teams. So
Van de Solaire from
Top Sport.
Yeah,
from Top Sport. So what a great race, and there were some really interesting things that happened. Hausler showed up for a moment. The guy was riding with no gloves the entire race. His hands had to be numb at the end, but he's a hard man, and I think we'll be talking about him a little bit later in the podcast. So yeah, that was an excellent race. I'm really sad that Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne didn't happen today because of the weather, but I can also understand why they did cancel the race, the safety of the riders, and things like that. Back in the day though, they would have never canceled that.
Oh no, they wouldn't have. And I mean, I've got to say, all these pictures tweeted of all the snow, and I was thinking, why couldn't it come here so I can have a snow day tomorrow?
Right.
Clear as a bell. Anyway.
Now, Tim, did you catch any of Omloop?
I didn't catch it live. Fortunately, I was following you guys on Twitter, and I caught up with the highlights afterwards. But yeah, it was a great race. It was a great race last year as well, if we all remember when Sepp van Marken beat Tom Boonen. But yeah, interesting because not the riders we expected on the podium. Some really interesting tactical decisions, some of which worked out really well, others of which didn't work out so well. And do you know what? It was almost a no-lose at the end. I think I'd have been perfectly happy for either Paolini or for Vandenberg to have won. So yeah, fantastic race.
All right. Well, one of the interesting things to me about Paolini winning the race is that he's from Katusha. Which brings us to our next topic of discussion, which is Katusha's inclusion into the World Tour after the UCI had denied them for ethical reasons. Now, one of the things that's really interesting to me about Luca's win yesterday is all the people on Twitter who were like, yeah, suck it, UCI. They should have been included in the World Tour all along. You know, I kind of like anytime somebody disses Lance, you know, people are happy. It's kind of gotten the same way with the UCI. Anytime, you know, the UCI looks bad, people seem to like celebrate on Twitter, and I've been guilty of it. I'll admit it. But you know, I'm not convinced that Katusha should be in the World Tour. I think that, you know, maybe the UCI has some legitimate reasons for not including them. You know, the ethical violations that I've thought about are, you know, Tony Colomb, Fanberger, Kolubnev, Galizmakov. All those guys are, you know, kind of had doping positives. We've got, you know, people looking into Menchov and Gusev and people working possibly with Ferrari. We've got this whole Kolubnev, Liège-Bastogne-Liège sailed to Alexander Vinokurov that could have been in there. We got Vladislav Ekimov from Lance's loyal lieutenant, right? I can see why the UCI was like, you know what, maybe these guys need to sit on the bench for a year. So, Tim, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, in some ways, actually, I agree with you. I think the situation as it got to where it got to, the UCI found themselves between a rock and a hard place. And I think there probably are some legitimate objections against Katusha's presence in the World Tour. Having said that, you can probably build a similar case against a number of the other 18 teams. So it's always difficult to know where to stop. But you know, they've really created a rod for their own backs now. We've got 19 members of the World Tour. The logistical problems that will create for race organisers. You've got the Tour and the Vuelta now, who will only have 3 wildcards rather than 4. You know, if I were one of the pro-continental teams who might be the one who misses out on one of those 2 races, I'd be pretty upset at them.
Yeah, you know, so I'm glad that Katusha's in the World Tour because I want to see their riders race in these races, but I'm also disappointed that the UCI kind of just rolled over and isn't sticking to its own rules. So, you know, overall, I think the World Tour, the point system and how they pick teams for the top tier need to be reevaluated anyway. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I think certainly the World Tour point system has come under fire from a lot of different places, both commentators, fans, riders, and so on. And I guess it's the biggest criticism has often been that it doesn't really recognise the effort of domestiques,
right.
In terms of contributing to wins, and that's really important for them when it comes up to contract renewal time. So I think, you know, there's a lot of things that do need addressing, but as you say, the UCI appears to be rewriting its own rule book whenever it's convenient to do so, or whenever it finds itself boxed in a corner. So, you know, there's clearly some work to be done in order to ensure the kind of transparency that Kathy's talking about.
Yeah. You know, I love the fact that a domestique almost took that Omloop race on Saturday. I loved that. I'm so happy for Stein, and I hope that, you know, what a great... I really wish that he would have won the race just because he's big like me, and, you know, he's not going to have very many opportunities. But, all right, now it's time to talk about Schlecks. Let's talk about Schlecks, baby. Let's talk about Frank and Andy. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that could be. It's been a tough year. You know, if you think about Frandy, the Schleck brothers, arguments with Johan Brunel last year, injuries, poor form, and then obviously Frank's doping positive in the Tour de France. You know, they've been the stuff of cycling parody and comedy everywhere for the last year. What do we think the future has for them? I mean, you got to remember, Andy fractured his sacrum last year at the Dauphine, a very painful injury. and really hasn't raced. I think he raced 28 days in 2012. Tim, tell us about some of the races he's abandoned, and then let's talk about these Schlecks.
Yeah, I think even before he pulled out of the Dauphiné, he was already starting to develop a little bit of a habit of abandoning races, wasn't he? Because he'd pulled out of Paris-Nice, he abandoned the Volta a Catalunya as well, and then obviously he was off for a few months with his recovering from his injury. And then he came back. He abandoned a race which was the Frank Vandenberg Memorial, I think, which neither of us can pronounce the name of properly. There was the Tour of Beijing, and I think it's fairly understandable why anyone would want to abandon that. But this year already, he's climbed off his bike in the final stage of the Tour Down Under. He lasted one stage, I think, at the Tour of the Med before he pulled out with what was reported as a respiratory infection. And then to top it all off, he withdrew from the Tour du Haut-Var last week before it had even started. So I guess the short answer is that he's basically done nothing of note since his injury, and it's really starting to become a big question mark over his return now.
Yeah, in a way, he's really kind of done nothing of note since the Tour de France, where he and Alberto battled, and he gets, the victory because of the doping violation. I was reading an article this week about the Luxembourg cycling chief, saying some things. Did you guys hear any about that?
Well, basically, he just dissed him, didn't he? Saying, he hasn't been doing his training, and, he needs to kind of get his act together, or else he's just going to ride off another season. I mean, I think, it can be, unfortunately, the Schleck brothers lend themselves to a bit of fun poking, I think. But I actually think it's starting to become really quite sad, and sad not in pathetic, but sad as in sorrowful, because, Andy, when he goes for it, like, when he did that solo run through the, Galibier with Cadel, chasing him across Alp after Alp. I mean, that was a spectacular,
brilliant riding.
Spectacular ride, and he can really, I was hoping that was going to be like his Cadel moment. When Cadel took the race in the World Championships after being accused of being a wheel sucker for God knows how long, and and he really came back as a real attacking rider, and I thought, oh my God, maybe this is Andy's Cadel moment, and he's actually gonna look like he wants to win, which is kind of what I think has always been his problem, is that he keeps saying he's got the stomach of anger or whatever, but but he says that, and you just look at him and go, really? I mean, because he just, I don't know, he doesn't have the killer instinct, I don't think. Frank used to, I think, but I mean, I think now that they're both so, God, they're just both connected, so intertwined with each other when they're racing, that I think we just kind of have to write them both off now. I mean, who knows what's going to happen when Frank gets back from his ban, but which is in what, July? It's not very far away, but but with Andy, I just think he's gonna be one of those riders that everybody says, gee, he could have really been something, but he didn't, and now he's running some bar in Luxembourg or something. I think it's really quite sad. I just do.
So, Tim, you think he'll get back to his previous level of performance, or has he lost his head completely? I mean, you've got that quote from Gene Regenwetter. What did he say?
Yeah, very much as you discussed, it was a quite amazing quote from him, I think. It did basically, as Kathy said, it accused him of not doing his training. And that is a pretty amazing thing to say in public about one of your own riders when you are the president of his national federation. And I think it's an indication of how big a concern his mental state is, because as in any other sport, a lot of cycling is won in the mind as well as in the legs. And I think it's pretty clear that Andy's just not there at the moment, and it is. Kathy used the word sorrowful, and I think that's right. It's so frustrating to see. You look at his palmares, and it's amazing how few big results he has had for a rider of his undoubted talent and reputation. And you really do. I really do have to question whether he will ever be the rider that he was, or that he was becoming in 2010 and 2011. I very much doubt we'll see it this year, and next year I think he will have a lot to prove.
Yeah, and next year, I mean, well, Frank's going to be, 33 next year? The clock's ticking on him. He will come back after the Tour de France. Maybe he'll be in the Vuelta. I mean, what does this mean for Frank, too? And what does this mean for Radio Shack in general? Is this team going to... This team has put all their eggs in the Schleck basket. I mean, we got Cancellara, and there's some issues there right now. But this team right now, they've got a ton of talent on paper, but, they've put their eggs in the Schleck basket.
Do you know, I think it's...
What do you think about Frank?
I think Frank will... Frank could still do something if Andy decides to go away or something, or retire, or just never show up for a race. But, I mean, I kind of think... I tend to think that if people... what goes around comes around. And I thought that the way they left... Saxo Bank, whatever anybody thinks of Bjarne Riis, I think that they took practically the entire team with them, and I think that they did it very, very badly, and even I was even really ashamed of the way Cancellara did it, and and I kind of think that maybe their bad luck is just bad karma in a lot of ways, because that team is just, because of the way the team is just, I mean, it just disintegrate. Well, especially after the merger with Radio Shack, it's just kind of, it's not a super force at all, is it? I mean, it's, you've got Cancellara, and he'll do, great things, I think, in the classics, and and he will be Cancellara. And then you have Jens, and then anybody else is just kind of, well, I mean, certainly the Schlecks, I don't think we can expect anything out of them.
Yeah, I think it's actually the karma's going to get worse, because I think this Puerto trial is actually going to make things worse for Bjarne Riis and some of the Radio Shack riders. Tim, tell me what you think about Frank. He's, what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's odd, really, because if you look at the two brothers' comparative records, and I know Frank's a few years older, but in many respects he's had the more consistent and almost arguably accomplished career. He's won the Tour de Suisse, he's won the Tour of Luxembourg, he's won the Criterium International. His breakthrough win was Amstel Gold in 2006, I think. He's got a string of podium finishes in the one-day classics, in major stage races. He's been top 5 in the Tour 3 times, I think, and in the Vuelta as well. That's a pretty good career in anyone's books. But I also worry that maybe we have also seen the best of him, because he refuses to cut the umbilical cord with Andy.
Yeah, well, I said this in a couple of podcasts ago. I think that the Peloton needs the Schlecks. They're fantastic characters to watch. When they are on form, they're fun racers to watch. They can't descend in time trial for beans, but they can climb. And when they're in races and they're in top form, they make racing fantastic to watch. I'm a little bit sad. I'm going to be going to the Tour de France this year. Neither one of those guys. I don't think Andy's going to be there. I got to admit, I don't think that he's going to have the form to be competitive with the guys that we saw at Oman battling on Green Mountain. Those guys are ready to rock right now, and Andy is just playing around. Okay. Well, that's it. That's your Schlecks education for the week. All right.
How
Tim,
long did it take you to figure those things out?
Well, when Tim wrote the headline, and Tim, I got to give you some major props. You are a brilliant headline writer. When you sent that over, I was like, oh man, I'm going to have fun with this on this podcast. So thank you for that, you editorial-in-chief wizard. All right. So let's... Tim, why don't you lead us into kind of what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks? I know that an exciting race is coming up in Italy that Kathy will have her eyes glued to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you'll be watching the haunches, so to speak. So, Tim, lead us out. Tell us what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah. The next couple of weeks is great, isn't it? March is the busiest month of the cycling of the cycling calendar. So there's 7 World Tour events, which is basically a quarter of the World Tour calendar just in 1 month. So over the next 2 weeks, I think basically we've got 3 big races that everyone, and I mean everyone, should be watching. So next Saturday we've got Strada Bianchi, white gravel roads, hard racing. We love that race, don't we? I know Kathy does.
I love that race.
Yeah. That race is brilliant. It is so exciting to watch, and I really hope the Cancellara shows up at his best, and I really hope that Greg Van Avermaet wins the whole thing. Sorry, Kathy.
No, Panache, you just need to be quiet when you're saying things like that. Because Fabs is going to come out and do it again, and it's going to be great.
Okay, just don't make me send the 2 of you to neutral corners now, okay?
All right, tell us about Paris-Nice. That's coming up too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got Paris-Nice and we've got Tirreno Adriatico, which overlap, and that's 2 of the really big stage races for the spring that provide a real major test and build up ahead of the Giro. So last year at Paris-Nice, of course, that was where Bradley Wiggins really put his marker down last year. And showed the kind of form that he carried all the way through to July. But Tirreno Adriatico as well. It's a fantastic race. And last year it was Vincenzo Nibali who won, and again it was a case of him showing the form that he would carry through the season, where he went on to podium at Milan-San Remo, at Liège, and then of course later at the Tour itself. So 2 very good races. Most of the big GC contenders for both the Giro and the Tour will be at one or the other. So it really feels like the season from a stage racing perspective really kicks off here, and kicking on from what we saw in Oman.
Yeah. And then, Tim, we have at the end of the month, right, Milan-San Remo and Flanders Classics. So March is a huge month. And Tim, I didn't tell you, but if I could win any race, I would win Tirreno Adriatico, because I want the trophy.
Oh,
You've
God.
seen
you want the trident.
Spear. Yes.
Yes, I want the trident. I would hang the trident above my fireplace in my living room, and I would worship it on a daily basis. All right. So I'm super excited for March. There's going to be, you are right. Most of the World Tour happens in that month. We got great classics racing. We got all the big guys and contenders coming out to race. So March is going to be a great racing month. I think I might actually have to get a subscription to Cycling TV or something, because my feeds have not been good, and I want to see this stuff. So I'll let you know if I get my subscription to that. Anyway, okay, let's end with our sprint finish, like we're always going to do. We've only done this once, but it's already become tradition, and I really enjoyed it last time. So this time we actually are going to close with some quick questions from our fans on both Twitter and Facebook. Thank you guys so much for interacting with us and asking some of these questions. So Tim, I got the first question. It's actually, you're going to ask the first question. I think you're going to ask it to Kathy. Go for it.
Yeah. So our first question comes from Michael Edward Grant via Facebook, and the question is: was there an exact moment when you got hooked on pro cycling?
Kind of. It's a weird story. It was way back in 2004 when technology was such that if you were watching digital TV and you wanted to tape it, you had to keep it on that channel. And a friend of mine was going to go away for the opening weekend of the tour. He was doing an Ironman or some such nonsense. And he said, "Oh, can you just tape, the tour for me?" And I said, "All right." So I just sat down to watch it. And as I'd said in the Ant Banter column this week, I've always loved sport. I mean, my dad had always really imparted his love of sport to me. And what happens when I start to like a sport is I have to know everything about it. I have to know the rules so that I know when something extraordinary happens, it is extraordinary. It's not like, oh, well, that happens all the time kind of thing. And so I sat down and I started watching it. And who should win the prologue and start my everlasting love of this man but Fabian Cancellara? And the reason I decided I loved him was because when he'd beaten everybody else, including Lance, they showed him, when Lance had finished and Cancellara knew he won, and he started crying, and I thought, I love this sport. And that pretty much was that. I mean, at first I was only really interested in the Tour and things like that, because that's how a lot of sports fans really get, cycling fans really get into it. And then I just started watching everything, and now I'm here.
There you go. All right, Kathy, well, it's your turn to ask the next question.
Right. Well, this one is from Irvin Smith, and this is another Facebook one, and this is for you, Christopher. Will Heinrich Hausler come through with a Classics win this season?
Oh my goodness, Heinrich Hausler, man, I love this guy. So, in 2009, he was like a nickel close from winning Milan-San Remo, and then he won stage 13 of the Tour de France in the most amazing fashion, going into a break in the rain and crying at the finish. And I love Heinrich Hausler. At first, my answer to this question, when you just told me, I think I was going to say no. But after watching Omloop on Saturday, I can't definitively say that he won't. If he gets in the right mix of guys into a break, if he would have gotten into that break on Saturday, I think that he would have actually had a shot at winning that race. His form was good. He had a little bad luck. I know that he touched the pavement a little bit. But this is a hard man. He loves these races. He races with no gloves. I mean, he is made for this. I don't think he's past his prime. I think he's kind of, his form hasn't been great in the last year or so. But I think with this new start on his IAM team, and he might have a shot. I think it's 60-40 that he could actually make a go at it. So that's going to be my answer. Okay, Tim, I get to ask the next question. It's from David Patrick 79 on Twitter. And this one is about Froome Dog. Is Chris Froome the only skyrider who can think on his feet? And will this make him a Grand Tour winner anytime soon?
Oh, that's so unfair. That's not one question, is it? That's two. Let me have a go. Can Froome think on his feet? Yes. As we were talking about earlier, he really impressed me in Oman, both on Green Mountain and then the following day when Contador really turned up the wick to see if he could stand the heat. So, yes, can he think on his feet? Absolutely. Will he win a Grand Tour? Well, a lot will depend on how strong his legs are. But if the opportunity arises at the Tour in July, I think he's sharp enough to take it. Whether he can beat Contador or not, that's another question. But I guess I'd also like to just throw in at the end, I don't think he is the only skyrider who can think on his feet. I've never been 100% convinced about Wiggo's natural instincts, but Bernie Eisel, for one, certainly has a keen racing brain. And I would actually also vouch for riders like Jonathan Tiernan Locke and Dario Cataldo. You only have to look at what those two guys did at last year's Tour of Britain and at the Vuelta on Cuito Negro to see that those guys really know how to win when the pressure's on. So, yeah, can Froome think on his feet? Yes. Will he win? Maybe.
Yeah, and Sky's got some youngsters too, like a young Joe Dombrowski who won the Baby Giro last year. When he gets around these older guys and he learns, he could be a guy too who could win a Grand Tour maybe someday. All right, we have one more question. Our final question is from Gerard van Bohemen, and it's one to quickly answer. What is your favorite race of the season, Kathy?
Paris-Roubaix.
Paris-Roubaix. I already told you mine. Mine is the Giro d'Italia. And Tim, how about you?
Yeah, for me it's the Giro as well. I think of all the Grand Tours, it has the most passionate fans, and in recent years it's had the most varied and the most innovative routes. I mean, come on. Who could forget 2010? Montalcino, Cadel Evans and all that mud. It was fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
I love that race.
Yeah, I love it. I love it too. All right, well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Tim and Kathy, for your great commentary. And remember to follow us on our blog at VeloVoices.com. We're also on Twitter at VeloVoices. And we're also on Facebook /VeloVoices. Be sure to log on, give us comments, give us feedback about the podcast, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Tim, Kitty, good night from Virginia. Have fun in London.
Good night.
Good night.
Velo Voices. Many voices. One passion. Pro cycling. For fans. By fans.